Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you had a great Christmas. Let's talk about OLEKSANDR USYK, the man of the moment, I suppose you'd call him. It's still less than a week since he defeated Tyson Fury in the rematch. And everyone's now discussing whether he's an all-time great, how he would fare against Muhammad Ali and all this. And yes, you can argue that people are getting carried away to some extent. However, I don't think there's any dispute that he is a great fighter. Where will his place in history be? You can't tell that at the moment because his career is still in motion. It's still going. You can only judge someone historically at the end of their career. Now, having said that, the question is then, well, should he retire? Now, I can give you my opinion, which is that I think it would be good if he did retire, because he would retire at the absolute top of his game. With a flawless record in 23 fights, he's become undisputed cruiserweight champion, undisputed heavyweight champion, won the Muhammad Ali trophy in the World Boxing Super Series. And there aren't many, maybe the brightest fight where he came even close to losing. Some of his fights were competitive. The two Fury fights were competitive. One of the Joshua ones, saying it's competitive might push it a bit, but I think I gave Joshua 4 rounds in one of those fights, 3 or 4 rounds. The rematch probably. But he's got nothing to prove, basically. So should he retire? Well, ultimately that's up to him. And I've given you my opinion. I say I'd like to see him retire because he could walk off into the sunset as this, undefeated, instant legend who, no one could really deride. Some people have said, well, he's only had, 6 fights at heavyweight, 7 fights at heavyweight. Witherspoon, 2, 4, 6, is it? 6 fights at heavyweight? Whatever the case, okay. And he unified the titles. You know what I mean? He went for the absolute best. It was quality, not quantity. But longevity does have a lot to do with it. I agree with that entirely. Yeah, you can argue about longevity being a major part of judging someone's place in history. But nevertheless, if he did retire at 37, who's going to knock him? How can history knock him? And I'm not even interested in this undefeated business because I don't really care about that. It's just the people he's beat, the way in which he went about his work, the fact that he won all his titles on the road, with kind of the so-called boxing establishment pretty much stacked against him. You saw, a few days before the rematch with Fury, Turki Al-Sheikh was desperate for Fury to win the fight. He was completely explicit about that. And yet, fair enough, the judges were straight. The judges, the fix wasn't in, thank goodness. And he ended up getting a thoroughly deserved decision. He should have had a unanimous decision in the first Fury fight. Fury was competitive, but didn't come close to winning either of those fights, not in my opinion. Now, should he retire? Why am I saying I'd like to see him retire? Ultimately, it's his decision. If he carries on, no problem. God bless him, all the rest of it. Great fighter. I'm a huge fan. But should he retire? Well, here's the reasoning behind my desire to see him walk off into the sunset as an all-conquering champion. And that is, if you look at one of the other great fighters of my lifetime, probably the man who's looked just about, at his peak, looked just about as unbeatable gets. There are only 2 that would fall into that category. One is Mike Tyson between 87, early 89. And the other is Roy Jones Jr., more so Jones Jr. than Tyson. Now, Roy Jones Jr., at his peak, was astounding, just an astonishing fighter. You were sort of scouring the history of light heavyweights and the middleweights and the super middleweights to try and find someone who, in the whole of history, who you would think would, how would he fare against Archie Moore? How would he fare against Ezard Charles, Gene Tunney, Bob Foster? Strange enough, Bob Foster was the one I had doubts about. I thought Bob Foster could have got to Jones because of the long levers and the fact that Jones did fight on he did fight on instinct and reflexes, and I just thought someone who's got long levers who could tag him long when he thinks he's out of range might get the better of him. And sure enough, who was the man who knocked him flat? The first one to knock him flat was Antonio Tarver, another very tall, wiry, light heavyweight. But the point was he was so dominant, Jones, that you just couldn't work out, what the hell, who the hell's going to beat this guy? And yet by the time he finished his career, Roy Jones had 66 wins with 47 KOs, 10 defeats, and had been stopped 5 times. Absolutely unthinkable that you would ever, the only person that could hand Roy Jones Jr. 10 defeats would be Roy Jones Jr. That's the way we were thinking. And so it proved. Now, if you go back to when Roy Jones beat John Ruiz for the WBA heavyweight title, that was the 1st of March 2003. If he'd have retired at that point, he would have been undisputed light heavyweight champ. Oh, no, he wouldn't actually, because he didn't hold the WBO version. Michalczewski held that, but he would have held all the other belts. And no one seriously thought of Michalczewski as being much of a threat to a Pete Jones anyway. He wouldn't leave Germany. In fairness, Jones wouldn't leave the United States either, because I think he based it on what happened to him in Seoul, Korea, when it was the worst decision I've ever seen, amateur or pro, when he lost the gold medal decision in the final at the Olympics, 1988, the worst ever decision I've seen ever at any level, amateur or pro. But he'd won that. He'd won a belt at middleweight. He'd unified at. By the way, at middleweight, he completely dominated Bernard Hopkins. He'd unified at super middleweight and had outclassed James Toney, of all people. I mean, a brilliant defensive fighter. He'd actually had Toney on the floor. And he'd been dominant at light heavy, and and then he'd gone up and he'd won a belt at heavyweight. Okay, John. People say about John Ruiz, well, he wasn't the strongest of heavyweight champions. No, he wasn't. That's absolutely true. But he did win the WBA belt 3 times, and there were other occasions. In fact, when he fought Valuev, both of those fights, you could make a case for Ruiz winning those. Strong case. So he'd done everything, and had he retired just after the fight on the 1st of the 3rd, 2003, a lot of people could have made a very sensible argument for him being the greatest fighter of all time. I'm not saying you could have put him above Ray Robinson or Harry Greb or Langford or any of the others, Willie Pep and so on. I'm not saying you could have necessarily, it would have been assumed, but he would have been in the argument. There would have been a debate. Roy Jones Jr., a lot of people would say, I say, greatest fighter of my lifetime, including Usyk, Mike Tyson, Chocolatito, many, many others. A great fighter, In any era of history, he would have been dominant, I think. If he wouldn't have been unbeatable, because no fight is unbeatable. Now, instead, he carried on for another 20 years. His last fight was in 2023 when he was in his 50s, and he lost an 8-round decision to a debutant. That's how much he'd slipped. And he'd been knocked out by Enzo Maccarinelli, Glenn Johnson. Tarver did him in the rematch. He got done in a round by Danny Green. Danny Green, I mean, come on, Danny Green was a good fighter, but doing Roy Jones Jr. in a round? Come on, man. He lost a rematch to Hopkins. He was shot to bits. Lebedev knocked him out in the 10th and final round over in Russia. And it was just a shit show. And as a result, people forget just how great he was, right? Now, if you look at Mike Tyson is another one. Okay, it's a different dynamic, a very, very different career to Roy Jones Jr., different style, nothing similar at all about the two fighters, really. But, Mike Tyson, a very brief, maybe 2 years, 2.5 years when he was at his absolute zenith. But nevertheless, a stunning fighter, absolutely stunning fighter. He finished with, well, actually, if you include that farce, which I suppose we have to because it's on BoxRec, that stupid farce against Jake Paul, he finished with 50 wins, 44 KOs, 7 defeats, 5 by stoppage, and no draws. Okay. But let's be generous to Mike. Let's say that he'd retired after being stopped by Lennox Lewis in 8 rounds. That was in 2002, June 2002. Now, he would have had 4 defeats on his record. Lennox Lewis, Holyfield twice, and Buster Douglas. Okay. And yes, he never really reached the heights that many of us thought he probably would when he was that, 19, 20-year-old tearing an absolute swathe through the heavyweight division, just thundering through the division, destroying everyone. But 2-time heavyweight champ, unified the division, won the linear belt off, or the linear title, if you like, off Michael Spinks. Looked very, 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 not just impressive as a young fighter, but unbelievably exciting and explosive. Would he be better remembered if he hadn't lost to Danny Williams by knockout, Kevin McBride by retirement, and then Jake Paul? Throw out the Jake Paul one. But yeah, it was a sad end to his career to lose to Williams and McBride, especially McBride. I mean, Williams could fight a bit when he was in his prime, but McBride was always an also-ran, and it was just sad seeing someone that great losing to people that you knew he would just stand completely obliterate in a couple of 2 or 3 rounds, So what is the point I'm making is, and the 2 examples I've used, is that if Usyk was to continue fighting, of course, who are you going to bet against? Let's say he gets a rematch with Daniel Dubois and he struggles and he wins it, but he looks, will that diminish his historical standing? Will people, what people like to yap? They like to talk a lot of crap. Oh, well, he squeaked past Dubois in the rematch. Well, what about the first fight when he knocked him out? In fact, he made him quit. What about if he even picks up a defeat? What if he hangs around for another 2-3 years and Moses Atama or someone else beats him? I'm not saying they would. I'm just saying if they did, because age is undefeated. I know it's a cliche, but age counts. Age matters. If you're an athlete, I was never an athlete. And I recognise since I got into my 50s that physically you slow up. You just can't do what you used to do. And it's you can't dismiss this, especially when you consider that Usyk, even though he's had 6 fights at heavyweight, he's had 2 decisions against Joshua, who's a good fighter, regardless of what the people who hate Joshua say. He's a very good fighter. 2 against Fury. And if you push aside your dislike of these pathetic fanboys, Fury is a very good fighter. All right, another 24 rounds. So that's 48 rounds against, 2 excellent heavyweights, very, very good heavyweights. Plus he had the war with Chisora, which wasn't easy. First half of it, Chisora was making him really work hard. Run out of puff, but there we are. Chaz Witherspoon, okay, 6-round run around. What about at cruiserweight? All those tough fights he had on the road. The Briedis fight was very, very close. I thought Usyk won it, but you can make a case for Briedis when it was close. I think Usyk won it, but he beat Gasayev. Did he beat Gasayev? He did, didn't he? Did he? I can't remember. Did he fight Gasayev? No, I'm thinking of Briedis. Huh? Well, anyway, I know he beat Hook, and he did beat Gasayev, didn't he, in Russia? Yeah. Those are tough fights as well, and there's a lot of 12-round decisions. That's a lot of camps and an awful lot of pro rounds. And it doesn't matter if you are good, you're still putting miles on the clock. Do you know what I mean? So I think if he walked off into the sunset now, he would preserve that pristine legacy. If he fights on, look at Lennox Lewis. He had a rough and tumble, a very, very tough fight with Vitaly Klitschko. Very tough fight with Vitaly Klitschko. And afterwards he recognised, do you know what, I'm slipping a bit here, and quit. He said, enough's enough. I've done it all. And why wouldn't he? He's been undisputed heavyweight champ. Usyk's been undisputed champ at 2 weights. What else does he have to prove? You should leave well enough alone. Now, okay, I know what some people are going to say, and it's an argument worth giving. Yeah, but great fighters don't abide by anyone else's standards. They abide by their own standards, and that's why they're great. Completely agree with that. Completely agree with that. There's a reason I'm not a world boxing champion. I never had the talent. I probably never had the temperament. And I never really kind of had the ego, if you like. Someone like Usyk, who is great, does. And he's a very, very well-adjusted, extremely mature man, a proper man. Never makes excuses. Always, he regards that sort of humility as being an intrinsic part of what being a man is. Because if you do stay humble, to use something that a phrase that Anthony Joshua always used to use, you stay grounded and you're able to look at things in a sort of cold-blooded, objective, clear way. I think that Usyk has that ability, and I don't think he'd go on. He obviously wouldn't go on just for the money. He wouldn't go on if he didn't want to, unless he thinks, you know what, my country's at war, and I need to set an example to the world of what Ukrainian people are like. He's a very, very patriotic man, a very religious man. He believes in all that. He believes in using his status for the betterment of his country and for the people that are currently under the cosh. I wonder if that might tempt him to carry on beyond the point where he really wants to carry on. He's a family man. He wants to be with his family a lot of the time, see his kids grow up. I think he's done his bit, and I would like to see him retire, definitely. But will he? I very, very much doubt it. I think possibly a rematch with Dubois is on the cards. If he wins that one, surely he'll retire then, because he'll have the IBF belt back and he'll be a two-time undisputed champ if you want to go by the belts. But we'll see. What do you think? Do you think he should retire or not? If you do think he should retire, why? And if you don't, say why again. Let me know what you really, really think. But yeah, comments below. I'm really looking forward to reading them. As always, thank you for your time. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit the like button, because it takes a second and it costs you nothing. So please, your support of the channel is always appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Bye for now.